Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy and very warm Saturday to you. It's heat wave time here in Chicago and soon across the country, and we will, of course, see more of that as we are living in a time of drill, baby, drill, which is just burn, baby, burn. They don't care. They never have. Little housekeeping. Some of you have heard me thank Julia on this show for all the years I've done it. She was my producer. She's moved on to greater things. And on this show, for the first time, I have a new producer. I'm very excited about that. And Maggie is great. So welcome, Maggie. She's joining me and Paul to try and make this show what it is. And of course, Andy is executive producer of all these shows, and he has been very helpful in keeping us all going forward. All right. We are 2 days past Juneteenth. And we don't talk about Juneteenth that much, and I would like to, because for most of my life, I didn't even know about it. And when I did, I guess I thought it was a kind of a niche holiday, a good idea, really important for those who celebrated it, but not universally important. And you know what? I was wrong. I was way wrong. I know better now. It's as important a holiday as any we have. And that's, of course, why the Trump administration has attacked it. And let me explain. The 4th of July, which we have celebrated for a long time, it celebrates our refusal to be governed by a tyrant, timely. It proclaims our faith that all are created equal and have rights that can't be taken away. But that idea did not meet reality in slaveholding America. Not close. And after the Civil War, after the passage of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments, we had a new birth of freedom. And so while Juneteenth commemorates that moment when African Americans in Texas learned they had been freed, it truly celebrates the achievement of finally creating a government that would embody the values we articulated nearly 100 years before. It celebrates the moment we gave governing force to the ideas we celebrate in the 4th of July. And that should not be controversial. But this year, our government is trying to suppress the holiday. And they're trying to roll it back. I mean, when asked about the Declaration of Independence a month ago, Donald Trump said it's about love and unity and respect. Seriously? Has he ever read it? So much for going to war in 1776 and again in 1861 to fight tyrants and enslavers. And I've said this a lot, and I'm going to keep saying it. If Congress passes the reconciliation bill, neither July 4th nor Juneteenth will have any meaning at all, because every day will just be President Trump Day. We need to do everything we can to stop Congress from taking this terrible step. And that's, of course, why Donald Trump is inflicting so much pain in so many places. He wants the spotlight anywhere but on Congress. So he's declared war on us. I am heartbroken for Los Angeles, for the pain an American president is inflicting on an American city. And let's be clear, Los Angeles is great, and it's mostly at peace, and where there isn't peace, it's because he's sending, I don't know who these people are, January 6thers who've been pardoned and then rehired, I guess, to go scare people, to grab them off the streets. No wonder people are upset. And he's promised to do the same to Chicago. And I've been talking to lots of folks here who are preparing for his ICE raids. It is so sad because preparation means finding relatives and friends to care for children should you not come home. It means leaving empty chairs at the dinner table in hope that the missing will return. But, we're also tough. So preparation, in addition, it means stepping up to make sure that ICE follows the law when it shows up, that officers identify themselves when they show up, and that they don't get a free pass to go where they have no warrant to enter. Now, we don't expect the Trump administration and their body armored thugs to cooperate. We do not expect them to come with warrants and unmasked and carrying identification and acting with the dignity of a government that pursues justice or law. We expect what we've seen everywhere: brute force, coercion, and the destruction of trust between communities and their government. We will not bring violence. Neither will we shrink from violence brought to us. That's where we are. Our side must be nonviolent, but I don't expect the other side to respond in kind. And I wish John Lewis were still here to help us rise to this terrible challenge. These abuses that we've seen in Los Angeles, the ones that have been amply documented everywhere, they don't pass, the smell test of these are just rogue officers. They stink as a fish rotting from its very orange head. And the agony of ICE raids is just one type of pain Trump is willing to inflict to get what he wants. Political violence, even sending bombers to Iran. What he wants is unchecked power. Think about his behavior on the very night when violent rhetoric once again became manifest. It's always manifest on the right, isn't it? This time, the political assassination of a Democratic leader in Minnesota. That should not pass. It should not go out of mind quickly. That's a terrible thing. Political assassinations absolutely undermine democracy. Absolutely. They have no place in a functioning democracy. And the increase in political violence is a direct measure of how far we have fallen. What did Donald Trump say that night? Here's the quote. Ready? Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, these and other such cities are the core of the Democratic power center, where they use illegal aliens to expand their voter base, cheat in elections, and grow the welfare state, robbing jobs and benefits from hardworking American citizens. These radical left Democrats are sick of mind, hate our country. I'm sorry, sick of mind and hate our country? From Donald Trump, these are fighting words, not healing words. And on the night of a political assassination, they can only be heard as an incitement to more violence. Cheating in elections, he ought to know. Robbing jobs and benefits from hardworking people? I'm sorry. Those are the hardworking people that he's grabbing off the streets and going into workplaces to take. They aren't the words of a president who cares about his country. They're not words that would be uttered by a leader who wants to bring us together. They cannot be spoken by anyone who cares about the truth. And on the day of a political assassination, they are just an incitement to more violence. But here's the thing. Donald Trump does not care about the violence that he calls for, because he just wants the outrage. He wants the attention. And this time we didn't bite firmly. But with civil voices, we rose above and reminded flamethrowers like Utah Senator Mike Lee of the human cost of echoing Donald Trump. And of course, maybe perhaps because of his lawless deportations, his dictatorial use of force in our cities, his incitement to violence, Americans are looking past his rhetoric finally. We're not taking them as one-offs, and we're focusing on the structures that can protect us: the rule of law, the institutions of democracy, the independence of the judiciary. And on cue, I'm going to talk about maybe I'll send my B-2 bombers. Never mind the United States isn't at war with Iran. Never mind that it's up to Congress to declare war. Never mind that Israel has already attacked and weakened Iran, attacked their nuclear program, now dominates their skies. They don't need us. But Mr. Trump is doing what he can. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Stay tuned. Maybe I'll drop a bomb. Why? He doesn't care about it either way. I mean, just a few days ago, he promised we were on the verge of a great deal with Iran. And Israel must have believed him because they never wanted us to make a deal with Iran, and they attacked. So now Mr. Trump is using their fight to claim the spotlight, as he always does. But what he really wants is that spotlight anywhere but on Capitol Hill, because that's where, in 2020, Mr. Trump sent mobs to overturn our election by force, and it's where today MAGA legislators are moving to sunset the democracy by legislation. We've talked about it. We have to keep talking about it. The bill contains languages that would eliminate any checks on presidential power. Gone is the independent judiciary's only tool for enforcing its order. If enacted, those executive orders of Donald Trump's have the force of law. Just like that, the whole nation becomes subject to the whims of one man. Our history will mean nothing. Maybe he'll drop a bomb on Iran. Maybe he won't. Maybe we should wonder about that. Maybe we should spend our time talking about that. But you know what he certainly will do? He certainly, in this bill, will take away funding for health care. He will take away funding for emergencies. He will cut funding for clean energy. He will cut funding for inspections for food and medicine and gun sales. He will sell our national lands. Even as Medicare and Social Security are now projected to go broke in less than 10 years, he'll increase our deficit by trillions of dollars, guaranteeing that we will never, ever be in a position to fix those programs. And why? He will do all this to raise money for tax cuts for billionaires whose lives won't change a bit, even if they get an extra $1 billion. Americans don't want any of this. None of it. But if Mr. Trump succeeds in distracting us, if he causes so much pain, we lose sight of the reason he's causing so much pain. Well, we might get all of it, and the curtain will fall on humanity's greatest experiment with freedom. I have a remarkable show for you today. Stay tuned. Amanda Zurawski, whose story is kind of about this pain that we've talked about, is up first, and you're going to want to hear that. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I first heard Amanda Zurawski talk about her terrible ordeal almost a year ago when she and her husband Josh spoke on the first night of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. It's a story of terrible public policy. It's a story of cruelty, but also of unimaginable bravery. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you able and are you willing to tell your story again so that we can, because I don't know that everybody's heard it, and then we can talk about what's going on since.
Yeah, of course. So I'm originally from Indiana, so your neighbor there in the Midwest. But I live in Texas now with my husband Josh, and Texas has one of the worst, most harsh abortion bans in the country. And in 2022, I was pregnant with our first, and this was a baby that we desperately wanted. Things went really well for 18 weeks, but then at the 18-week mark, unfortunately, my water broke prematurely, and it was too early for the baby to survive. And there was nothing that they could do. The doctors couldn't do anything to reverse what had happened. So unfortunately, we learned that we were with complete certainty going to lose this baby that we wanted so badly. Now, at that point, my doctor should have been able to induce labor. But because of the ban that had gone into effect that same week, by the way, that my water broke, because the ban had just gone into effect, inducing labor would have been considered an illegal abortion because the baby's heart was still beating. So I had to wait until either her heart stopped beating or I met one of the rare medical exceptions in Texas, which is life of the mother. So essentially, I had to be almost dying before I could get care. And that's exactly what happened. 3 days later, after my diagnosis, I went into septic shock in a matter of minutes, nearly died, Fortunately, my doctor was able to stabilize me enough to deliver the baby. Then I crashed with another bout of sepsis and ended up in the ICU for about a week. And as a result of everything that I went through, my reproductive organs remain permanently compromised. And bear in mind, all of this was preventable. This did not need to happen.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know you've shared it hundreds, maybe thousands of times, and I'm sure it can't ever be easy to do. I mean, you've decided to go very public with what you had every single right to keep a very private tragedy. What motivated the decision to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. My husband and I were so angry about what had happened unnecessarily. And we got to talking and we realized unfathomably, I was the best case scenario, right? Because we live in a big city. We have health insurance. We have access to health care. Josh was able to get me to the hospital in a timely fashion. We didn't have to arrange, for other living children, childcare. And we just kept thinking, all of these pieces were in place. All of these privileges were afforded to us. What about folks who aren't as lucky as us? What will happen to those folks? And now, 3 years later, we know what happens, right? People are dying as a result of these bans, and we just could not sit by and idly let that happen. We had to do something to fight back for ourselves, but also for everyone else who is experiencing this type of trauma and maybe can't fight back. And so it was really important for us to speak out. And every time I do, it is my personal story that you're hearing, but keep in mind, it is the story of so many people who have gone through something similar, unfortunately.
I want to say that it is, there's a parallel as well now that this same regime, this MAGA regime that's led to the cruelty of the anti-abortion laws in America. For gosh sakes, just health care. I mean, it's what it is. But it isn't the only form of health care they don't believe in. So I'm thinking about Robert Kennedy and his war on vaccines. They're going to be parents who have a similar experience. They're going to watch their children die of preventable diseases. I can't imagine that in 2025 we're living in, the 1300s.
It's unthinkable, isn't it? And in Texas, in West Texas, there actually is a measles outbreak, and children have died in Texas because they're unvaccinated and they're contracting this virus that we thought we had eradicated. And it's really heartbreaking, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter, which is, the far right says that they're pro-life and they care about babies and kids, but what are they doing to take care of them after they're born? Nothing, right? And I think that just really goes to show how not pro-life they actually are.
Yeah, the rhetoric's all lies. I think we've seen that. Well, what was it like? Now, you took this pain and you took your compassion for others who you didn't want to see suffer the same way, and you stepped up. I mean, I watched you. What was it like to speak at that huge convention? I was
oh my gosh.
Audience.
Yeah, it was quite a whirlwind. So fortunately, that was not my first foray into public speaking. I had been speaking out quite a bit up until that point. I was actually part of I was a surrogate for the Biden presidential campaign that eventually became the Harris presidential campaign. So I'd been speaking out on the campaign trail quite a bit. So I was used to it. I was comfortable telling my story, but that definitely was a different environment. Fortunately, nobody told us how many people could fit in that arena. Nobody told us how many people would be tuning in on live TV. So it's a very good thing that I did not have those numbers in my head until afterwards, because I think I would have been a lot more scared. But, it was just really empowering to know that the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party was making reproductive freedom such a key issue and such a key focus. And I was just really honored and proud to be able to contribute to that messaging. I will say when you're looking out at the arena, the lights are so bright that we really couldn't see anything at all. But the one person who I happened to make out in the crowd was Nancy Pelosi. And I saw her and I thought, oh gosh, I better not look back out into the crowd again. Just keep it together here. So it was pretty remarkable. It was a surreal experience.
Yeah, it was packed. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. I bet. So you went on, you campaigned, and then the country made a different decision. Donald Trump won. America put him back there. Did that? I mean, it must have felt like the country was just turning its back on women, on women's health, on their well-being. It must have felt like a betrayal.
It was interesting. I will say the next morning it was tough to get out of bed, but eventually, we can't be beaten into fear and submission. And so eventually I did get myself back together and I'm continuing the fight. But I think the election was real interesting. I think, obviously reelecting Donald Trump was a real blow. But I don't think it was a total loss, especially on the reproductive health care front. We had ballot measures in 10 states, and in 7 of those states, the ballot measures supporting abortion access passed. And technically, it won the majority in Florida as well. So that's 8 states, but they had an arbitrary percentage that they didn't meet, unfortunately. But that does go to show that people do care about reproductive freedom and they care about women. I think we had obviously a difficult time connecting the dots between the bans that we see now and Donald Trump, but I think we can draw lines where people care about reproductive freedom, and we're seeing that, and we see it time and again in elections.
Yeah, and I want to add, as a husband and as a father of women, that this is an issue for men too. I mean, the reproductive freedom is entirely about your body, not mine. But any man who loves women, who has family, who has daughters and wives, this is health care for women. And it's appalling, so it is, it affects all of us. I mean, I'm sure
that's exactly right.
Your husband suffered not the same way you did, but painfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's very passionate about this. As you mentioned, he was at the DNC with me. He was on stage right there next to me, because that illustrates, to the nation that this is something that impacts everyone. This affects couples. It affects families. My family was impacted. My husband's family was impacted. And reproductive rights are basic human rights, right? And so if you can't see how that affects all Americans, then you're not paying close enough attention, because it is about basic human rights, which we are all guaranteed in this country.
I think we are all still guaranteed them. I'm not certain about that right now.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be guaranteed them for sure.
That's right.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So you picked yourself up, you dusted off that last election, and you got back out there. So talk about what you're doing now. Talk about the organizations you're doing it with, and the kind of reception you're getting.
Yeah. So, I think what we saw in the immediate weeks and months after the election was a lot of despair, right? And a lot of folks were feeling just hopeless and they had given up. And I heard a lot of folks saying things like, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand, or I'm going to not pay attention for the next 4 years. And I got quite scared, because I think that's a very dangerous attitude to take. Certainly we need to take care of our mental health and take care of ourselves, but I don't think not paying attention is the answer. And I think when we are silent and complicit, that's when things are going to get even worse. And so I'm sort of on this new mission of trying to bring hope to people and trying to help them continue fighting back. And I'm seeing a real turn in the last couple of months of people plugging back in, getting back engaged, and really using their voices to speak up, which I'm really excited about. And I'm actually in our nation's capital right now. I'm in DC with a group called Free and Just, which works to help people advocate for themselves. So other storytellers like myself, their families, and by the way, these aren't just women, they're men, women, members of all different types of communities who are sharing their own stories. So they're doing exactly what I have been doing, and they're fighting back by using their voice. And so we are meeting here in DC. There's 100 storytellers that are coming together, and we're meeting with lawmakers, and we're speaking up, and we're using our voices and our powers to fight back. And I think it's really exciting that, I mean, heartbreaking that there's this many people with these stories, but very empowering to see them turning their grief and their pain into power.
I think that's fabulous. And, I was at the last big set of rallies, the No Kings rallies. It's so interesting because there are people, the speakers, how these things work. Whoever organizes a crowd gets to speak. And they were kind of niche-y. I mean, they were about issues for sure. A couple of them were labor, a couple of them were immigration. I honestly couldn't hear a couple others. Did not hear women's reproductive rights from the podium. But, when you talk to the people who are standing out there, they're out there for all kinds of reasons. And many of them were out there because of reproductive freedom. Others were out there for other reasons. But there's this broad coalition where everyone is proud to stand with anyone else who's taking up this fight right now. And so you have allies that have never thought about the trauma you went through, but they're willing to be solid allies right now.
That's exactly right. And I think, it is important for us to continue telling our stories, whatever those stories may be, because even though, to your point, it might not be something that you have specifically experienced or dealt with, you can probably see yourself or your aunt or your cousin or your daughter in someone like me who is telling their story. And so I think that's one of the key elements in why we need to keep speaking up, and on a whole host of issues, right? There's plenty of things happening in this country right now that we can be talking about. And I think we have seen firsthand over and over again how storytelling really moves the needle and can change hearts and minds and hopefully eventually votes. And that's what, this organization that I was talking about, Free and Just, is helping people do, kind of uplift these voices and these stories, because I think it is so critical to humanize these issues that for so long have been dehumanizing, really.
Just political, yeah. Well, storytelling is the only thing people ever remember. Narrative, it's the most powerful way to make a point. It's why parents tell stories to children. It's why myths are so powerful. We remember stories. We love theater. We love, really when it's about, we connect with each other. It's the closest thing we can get to sort of this magic connection with each other, is to share our stories, and always has been.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, data is great and numbers are great, and certainly those things are important. But when you see a mother to other children talking about her experience, and you see the emotion and you see the pain, it's impossible to ignore, right? And so I think that's why it's so important to keep doing this work. And by the way, everyone has their own story. And I think some of the most meaningful conversations we can have and the most impactful areas where we can do this work is in our own communities, right? I've been very public for a long time, but some of the most impactful conversations I've had have been very private. They have been around kitchen tables, in coffee shops, with those one-on-one connections where you can really get through to people. And so I do think everybody has the opportunity to advocate in this way, and perhaps in an even more impactful way?
Yeah, I teach a course at the University of DePaul, and I teach about our democracy, but I also teach these kids to tell their own stories. Because if they're ever going to go into a room, in a political room, an organizing room, how are people going to trust them? How are they going to know who they are? They have to be able to tell their own story. It has to be their story, not something they read, and they have to be able to tell it honestly. And I was, every time I teach it, I am stunned. These are young people, but a number of these stories are like your story.
Mm. It's been an interesting journey too. The more I talk about it and the more I do tell my story, I've actually been surprised to find how healing it's been. And so I hear that a lot from other folks too, that, you know, it's helping to process, and it's helping to kind of take back what happened and turn it into my own power and make it my own story and make it into, you know, sort of this mission rather than just something that happened to me. And so harnessing that ability has been really, really healing for me. And I think the same is true for a lot of my fellow storytellers. I'm curious if your students would feel the same way.
They absolutely feel that way. First, they are afraid to tell their story. And you have to make the environment, they have to trust to do it. Particularly the first time, they really have to feel safe. And we work our way up, and afterwards it's amazingly first cathartic and then empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you do that with them. That's great.
Yeah. Well, it turns out, as you say, they've all got stories. And, you know, being young and often first generation in college in America is not easy. They have really tough, powerful stories to tell. Beautiful stories to tell.
I think it's interesting too, something I've noticed, you know, whether it's on the campaign trail or in some of the other work that I've done in the last few years, it almost gives people permission to then tell their own story, right? And when they see me talking about what happened to me, they feel emboldened to share their own stories. Sometimes it's back at me. Sometimes it's, you know, they take it home and tell someone else. But it's that permission structure that I think is really important and empowering. I see that a lot. Actually, I talk about with men and advocating on reproductive rights. I think for so long, men weren't joining the fight because they didn't see the issue as theirs. They didn't think that it was something they could or should weigh in on. And now as we see more men enter the space as advocates, I'll plug my husband because I'm so dang proud of him. But he's also working to create that permission structure for men so that they feel like it's something that they can really partner with us and advocate with us as allies. And it's been really motivating and encouraging to see more and more men do that.
Yeah, I think earlier on in the arguments about reproductive freedom in America, it was also tied to piles of other issues about women's self-empowerment. And so men weren't always welcome in the fight. It was, you know, we were told, look, you can be an ally and please be supportive, but it's our fight. And we have to stand up for ourselves. And I respect that immensely, but times have changed. I think women have won many battles and have fewer things to prove. So there's a different role for men in that fight.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you're right. I think absolutely I respect that mentality. But now I think it's become pretty clear that we are going to need men to help us in this fight, right? We're going to need them to help break through. And so please join our fight. We're happy to have you.
Yeah. But, you know, it's so interesting. Just be like, you want healthcare. You want to be treated right, and you want to have access to healthcare. And for gosh sakes, you don't want your ability to have a child stolen from you because of somebody's ideology. And being on the other end of that feels like you're getting stepped on by some powerful actor, in this case, the state of Texas. And it turns out to be the same feeling that people have when they watch their neighbor get picked off the streets by ICE, or when they, they're worried about climate change, and they get told, yeah, forget about that. We're just going to drill forever. People feel like there are forces out there that want them to be helpless, and that are telling them, you're helpless. We are going to impose our way on you. And that turns out to be something that nobody likes. Nobody likes it, right?
As it turns out.
Yeah. And we all share in this because the same guys are doing that to us on all sides. So there are a lot of ways now we can form alliances and allies and coalitions where we can care about the thing that's deeply impacting us personally. And others will support it because they have a cousin interest.
That's exactly right. And I think, what people are seeing today is our rights being taken away from us. And in my lifetime, this is the first time that I've seen this happen. Certainly, I've seen other communities fight for equal rights, but I have never seen rights that I was born with taken away from me. And I think that's been a real wake-up call for folks. And it's not just in reproductive freedom. We're seeing it in other areas as well. And as people feel the real implications of that happening to them on a very personal level, I think they're realizing that they can't sit back and be silent. We have to engage and fight back, or else, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. I mean, we have a Supreme Court that I think in almost every case has decided that human rights are less important than property rights. It's an appalling spectacle, an appalling one.
It is. And I think, some of the despair that I hear from people is caused, in my opinion, intentionally, right? It's this constant chaotic news cycle where there's always something crazy happening, and the next thing happening is crazier than the last. And I think it's meant to distract, overwhelm, confuse, and force people to kind of check out because it just feels too overwhelming. And I think that's really dangerous. And as I was saying at the start here, I think now more than ever, we do need to plug in and use our voices to stand up for what we believe in.
Amanda, I could not agree with you more about the distraction, about one thing being crazier than the next, about will I bomb Iran? Won't I bomb Iran? Stay tuned. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you tomorrow. I mean, that's just crazy talk, right? We're talking about war, and that's not how you talk about it. It's not a game show. It's not like what curtain you're going to pull, right? But he wants everybody's attention so that we don't pay attention to the things that matter in our lives in the same way, or to the things that he's doing or what he's hiding in his one big ugly bill. But these narratives that you tell have a way of breaking through, have a way of and you tell them and yours breaks through, and others tell them and theirs breaks through. And I think what we've gotten now, after 10 years of seeing this man and what he does, is that we now have a big picture, and we can all see what you're seeing, which is today's firestorm is just, it isn't the thing we should pay attention to. It's just another firestorm in this effort. And we might as well, after all this time, start to care about what we actually love.
That's exactly right. And fight for it, right? And we know that it's not going to be easy. But I think that the things most worth fighting for are the hardest to fight for. And so, I just really encourage people to find the things that they care about and really fight to protect them. And it doesn't have to be on, some big national stage. I mean, certainly people should be paying attention at the local level as well. There's been an enormous amount of work done in Texas in our legislative session that just concluded on some of these rights. And we've had an enormous impact, and it's been really encouraging. But those local fights, sometimes even city council, really, really important to pay attention. And I think that's a place where people can really plug in. And I get asked that question all the time, right? What can we do to fight back? What can we do? Pay attention to some of those local issues and use your voice. I mean, you can go to your own city council chamber, to your own state house, and you can advocate there.
Well, in Texas, I believe in the last round of elections, the MAGA candidates for school board lost every seat.
That's right.
So,
Yep. It was
right? So,
very encouraging. And as a former teacher, I was delighted, let me tell you.
yeah, me too. I'm also a former teacher, a former elementary school teacher. Um, so, uh, yeah, that was fabulous, right? And so people are paying attention, and to do what you do is very hard, and I admire it immensely. But I want to suggest that what we all have to do isn't that hard. It isn't. We just have to remember what we love, and then go vote, register, make sure you can vote, and then talk to everybody. You talk to everybody every day anyway. Like, make this one of the things you talk about. It isn't actually that hard. And the other side's going to come at us, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and
I mean,
you know,
you're alive, you're out there, you're standing on your own 2 feet, and you have been very public about something that's enormously hard, and they've seen it, and here you are still doing it. Right?
Yep.
It can be done.
That's right. Well, the fight isn't done, so as long as there's still a fight to be had, I'll suit up. That's for sure.
So you're getting this great reception, and as you say, most people agree with you, right? I mean, every time it's on the ballot, we win. Most people agree. So it's a minority of folks who are making rules, which seems odd in a democracy, but okay. Most people think women should have health care. And real health care, which includes reproductive health care. So how has this fight changed your life?
Oh, immensely. My vision for what my life was going to be was just completely scrapped and, tossed in the trash can, and we started over. But I think this is the hand that life dealt me. And so this is what I'm going to do with my life, because it is so important to me. It has become a huge part of my identity. And although I've always been pro-choice, and this was something that I always cared about, it wasn't something that I necessarily saw myself dedicating my life to, but it is now. And I feel very passionate about it. And I know that, like I said, it's going to take a long time to get what we want, but I really feel like I am built for this, and this is what I am supposed to be doing. And I feel very fortunate to have some of the opportunities that I've had to be able to continue this work and stand up, not just for myself, but for all women, for all people in this country.
It's really kind of amazing. I mean, I remember the moments that set me on new trajectories in my life. There are 3, maybe. And they've all 3 of them were terrible. And they all ask, they either run you over or they ask you to dig deep and find some reserves of spirit and soulfulness and courage that, you didn't know you had. And you've clearly found them.
Yeah, I think you got to meet the moment. And this is what the universe is asking of me right now, and I'm fortunate that I'm able to meet it. Now, I'm also very lucky to have an amazing husband and support system. My family's absolutely incredible. And, what I have noticed in the last few years is how personal this issue is for people. And if you just talk about it, and if you just educate people about what's going on, to your point, no one is saying, oh yeah, what happened to you, Amanda, is exactly what should have happened. We think that that's right. We just have to educate people. And I think we'll find that most of them are with us. And it's been really impactful to see people really change their hearts and minds on this issue.
Or find their hearts and their minds on this issue. Yeah. I mean, people, what happened to you was terrible. But the idea that a big, our government is in our bedrooms, is making decisions about your womb, is appalling in every kind of way. I mean, it's just not the freedom anybody was promised. And, the Supremes, when they talk about it, I mean, Samuel Alito in his, when he writes, he has to dig back to 1300 for citations that fit his right, his views. And that's what he did in the Dobbs case. It's medieval, and it's not fitting a nation that actually values human beings.
That's right. And I think, sometimes when I get into the ins and outs of my story and some of the nitty gritty details, people are just so shocked to hear some of the details, like the fact that when I was in crisis, my doctor had to consult with an ethics board at the hospital and had to check with a lawyer. And these are not things that Americans want out of their healthcare providers, right? They want their doctor to be able to provide healthcare in the way that makes sense and using their best judgment. We don't want the government in our doctor's offices. I don't want my governor, my attorney general in the room with me when my doctor and I are having a conversation about my health. And I think most Americans would agree.
Yeah, I mean, there is a proper role for government in healthcare, and that is to help contain the costs and to help people pay for it, and to help make sure that medicines are safe and effective, and to help fund the research that moves it forward, but not, for God's sakes, to tell somebody what they can and can't decide to do with all of that.
That's exactly right. And I don't think most politicians also hold medical licenses. So I find it interesting that they feel they have the jurisdiction to make some of these laws over things that they know nothing about.
Well, if lawmakers could only pass laws about the things they knew a lot about, we wouldn't have any laws. I mean, like, seriously, I mean, they don't know about aviation. They got to pass laws about, I mean, in a democracy, the legislators do have to legislate. That's why you have committees and staff, and you try and get the best interest, and why you have to take ideas and hold hearings. But, nobody's an expert in these areas. It's very tough to pass good laws, but one basic value, which I was like, okay, since it's hard to pass good laws, since it really is hard to pass good laws, let's not pass laws that impose bad judgment on everybody else, and preserve people's freedom as much as possible from these decisions.
That's right. Or at least the very bare minimum, listen to the experts when they're coming to you and advising you, like they did in Texas. Before the ban went into place in Texas, so many physicians went to our lawmakers and said, if you enact this ban, terrible things are going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. Please do not pass this law as it's written today. Well, the lawmakers didn't listen to the physicians, and now we're in the position that we're in today, where exactly what the physicians warned about is what's happening.
Amanda, help me understand this, because from way up here in Chicago, it's hard for me to understand how your governor can get elected, because from here he looks like one of the cruelest, most dangerous governors in the country.
Well, there are a number of bad actors in Texas, I will say. We've got no shortage of them. And I think, unfortunately, what happens is some of these electeds appeal to their base, and they get elected, and then they get worse when they're in office. So if you look back on Governor Greg Abbott's track record, he was much more moderate at the beginning of his career than he is now. But they get into these positions of power, and they become more and more corrupt over time. And I think there's a number of factors that are going on there. Obviously there's a lot of money that's happening, that's being passed to get certain laws. There was a huge school voucher push in Texas this session that was pushed through as a result of, some very wealthy people kind of stocking the pool. But also in Texas, at least for the governor, we don't have term limits. So he'll just sit there until he decides he's done. And then we've also got really horrific gerrymandering going on. And so it's a really, really difficult state to turn purple. But, I think the flip side to that coin is that the more corrupt they get and the more badly they behave, the less their constituents are on board. And I hope we're going to see that reflected in the midterms next year.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, on the Republican side, we have a, not a virtuous cycle, but a deadly one, where the incentives to just get worse are big, because you say they're playing to their base. They're actually competing with each other to inflame their base. And it's, so the right wing has gotten very radical in America. The things that are in this bill that they want to pass are, sort of unconscionable in most of our history, but they have a different view because they've radicalized themselves, so they get worse and worse and worse. And I think every time we look at the big picture, stories like yours remind us this is about human beings. It's not about the brand of two political parties. It's about how do you want to treat your neighbor? How do you want to treat your family? If we think that way, we'll be okay.
That's exactly right. And I think, especially with reproductive rights, it's become so politicized. And this is not about a political party. This isn't about left or right. This is about people accessing basic health care. And I think that's something that everybody should care about. It's just, the politicization of an issue, which is just so frustrating.
Yeah, and cruel.
Cruel, exactly. And so that's why we work so hard to undo some of that.
Well, it's been eye-opening for me to have this conversation with you, and I'm very grateful that you continue to go out there and share your story and your evolving story, because now it's not just a story of being a victim, but a story of being an advocate and of courage and, frankly, of winning.
Yeah. And, I thank you so much for having me on. I think it's really important to tell these types of stories, particularly in places like Chicago, right? And places where people feel really safe and they feel insulated from some of these laws, because if you live in a blue state, if you live somewhere where you have protections, it can almost be unfathomable that this is the reality somewhere else. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to reach your listeners. And, we talked about the importance of storytelling, and I hope that your listeners will take the opportunity to continue this conversation by either sharing their own story. Now they know mine. They're welcome to share mine as well, because that's how we keep this momentum going. So thank you so much for having me.
Keep up the good fight, Amanda.
I sure will.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a break. You're going to get the local news. And when we come back, Chris Geidner is going to talk about the law with us. You don't want to miss that. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And welcome back to Chris Geidner. His work is absolutely essential for anyone who wants to understand the role of America's judiciary in this moment in our history. I don't know how he has time to do half of what he does. And Chris, that you're going to spend some time with us today while the Supreme Court is, at this part in their session is something I'm very grateful, because I know that you're just slammed with stuff to do. Thank you so much.
Of course, glad to be here.
For those of you who don't remember, Chris writes something called Law Dork, which, if you have any interest in America's judicial system and its role in the present crisis, you have to subscribe. Law Dork on Substack. All right, Chris. Boy, we have a lot to talk about. And would you be willing to start with the decision that allows states to ban gender-affirming care for minors? I read it. I'm not a lawyer. I read it still, but I found their arguments almost as specious as the decision is painful.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this case is probably one of the biggest decisions of this term, and I think for because of that, I think that the Chief Justice was hopeful that putting it out a little earlier and then having another 2 weeks of decisions will hopefully distract attention from that by the end of the term. But I am glad that that's not working on you. This is essentially over the course. It's really dramatic over the course since in 2020 there were 0 states that banned gender-affirming medical care for minors. 0. And in 2021, there was 1 state. In 2022, there were 2 states. In 2023 and 2024, by the time we got to today, it's now about half of the country that has one of these laws. And when if you just start from there, you already have to question why somebody's doing it. Did people start dying? Was there? I mean, like you think about like aspirin and Tylenol, and what was there some horrible like an airbag that went wrong, some recall? Like no, it wasn't. It was just that this effort from the far right to raise this as an issue, to make this a controversy, to get states with Republican trifecta, as in they both legislatures are controlled by Republicans and they have a Republican governor, to pass these laws. And when they started being challenged, all of the judges, regardless of who appointed them, even including 2 of them who were appointed by Donald Trump in his first term, said, no, these are clearly unconstitutional. These are likely unconstitutional, and they blocked them from going into effect. And that was where we were as recently as the summer of 2023. Right now, in 2023, there was not a single judge anywhere in the country who had upheld, there was no court that had upheld any of these laws. And all of the judges, all of the courts to have heard these cases had blocked them. And it's just over the past 2 years, once these cases started getting to more ideological appeals courts, and then to this very ideological Supreme Court, that the decisions went the other direction. And essentially, the simplest way of looking at these cases is there were 3 arguments: that these laws discriminate on the basis of sex, because if you are a cisgender teen boy, you are able to get testosterone if needed, or able to have puberty blockers if needed. And if you are were assigned female at birth and wanted testosterone, you can't get it. Under the Tennessee law that was before the Supreme Court, and under all of these laws. And so sex discrimination is the first claim. The second claim is almost more obvious. It's that they discriminate on the basis of transgender status. And then the third argument was that they infringe upon parental rights to decide the medical treatment for their children, to control the upbringing of their children. And judges across the country, when they were before trial courts seeing the evidence, agreed with those arguments. The Sixth Circuit that heard the Tennessee appeal held otherwise, said this isn't sex discrimination, and the Supreme Court has never said that transgender status gets heightened scrutiny, gets more scrutiny from courts. So we're judging all of this under rational basis, which basically means if you have any reason, lawmakers, you're allowed to do it. And that was appealed to the Supreme Court. And on Wednesday, the Supreme Court, an opinion by John Roberts, said we agree with the Sixth Circuit. They gave a little bit of different reasoning, but they said that this is not a sex classification at all. And they said that this is not a transgender status classification at all. The Supreme Court hadn't taken up the parental rights argument, so that wasn't before them. But Chief Justice Roberts for the Supreme Court essentially sidesteps the whole question of how you would actually look at this evidence, which you would do if it was being considered under heightened scrutiny, if he had found that there was a sex classification. And because he did not find that, it was just considered under this rational basis. And what he did then, because you only needed a rational basis, he didn't have to decide whether all of these claims from the state about gender-affirming medical care for trans minors, he didn't have to investigate them at all. All he said was Tennessee decided there was uncertainty, and because of that, they banned this care. And that was enough. The uncertainty itself was enough. And that led to Justice Sotomayor's dissent, which I have a feeling you're going to want to talk about.
Yeah. Before we get to that, I'm outraged by this for so many reasons. Moral panic is a right-wing political strategy. I get it. You know, you live in the world of politics, you see that. But it's not meant to be a jurisprudential strategy. And deciding to reward it at every opportunity, which this court does, is playing politics, not playing law. It's just period.
Yeah, I mean, it's what Justice Thomas, his entire concurring opinion was essentially, as my friend Jay Willis at Balls and Strikes wrote, was a transphobic blog post, essentially. Right. Yeah. He just sort of went through, it was not a legal concurring opinion. It was literally a policy argument in order to attack essentially elite opinion.
Right. So there's a place for people to be bigots in America. There's a place for people to have whatever opinions, informed and ill-informed, that they want, and they're allowed to say them. But that's not the role of Supreme Court justices, period. That's what they did here. So they, in deciding to crush trans kids and their parents, all they did was once again make the court a less reliable, less trusted, institution in America, and that just makes the whole country more dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it was. The way that they went about it, and the fact that they were able that what Roberts did to the Equal Protection Clause in finding a way to decide that a law that if you change the sex of the person, you get a different outcome. Essentially,
so let me ask you this.
In Justice Sotomayor's dissent, I mean, what
I want to get there. Wait, one before. I don't want to go to her just yet. Just to make sure I understand it. So, let's say a law bans writing left-handed. It is now illegal to write left-handed. If I apply the court's logic, it would be correct to say the law doesn't target left-handed people because right-handed people are also banned from writing with their left hand.
Right. That's what that. I mean, that's essentially. I mean, that is essentially what Justice Sotomayor wrote. What
Go ahead.
Roberts tried to claim was that this is essentially what he said is this is not a classification based on transgender status or sex, even though, as we all know, anybody who has lived in the country for the past 3 years know that's the entire thing that the lawmakers were talking about. And it came about as lawmakers were passing bills on several other fronts addressing transgender people's lives. And but despite that, what Robert said is this is not a law that classifies based on sex or transgender status. It's a law that classifies based on age, and it's a law that classifies based on what he called medical use. And essentially what he said, and this takes us further through the looking glass, is that this isn't a case over hormone therapy and puberty blockers. It's a case over the use of hormone therapy and puberty blockers for gender dysphoria. And because it's only about that medical use, that's not that's not a classification based on sex or transgender status. It's based on medical use.
Right. No, this defies logic. It defeats not. So let's talk about the dissent. Let's tell everybody about that, because she was pretty rough.
I mean, Justice Sotomayor, from the start of the opinion to the end of the opinion, essentially said, like, you are not allowing the Equal Protection Clause to do the work it is supposed to do, particularly for vulnerable people. By retreating from meaningful judicial review, she wrote, exactly where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. In sadness, I dissent.
Yep.
I mean, that is her sort of like, let's step back and look at what this means in the context of what the Equal Protection Clause is supposed to do. But she doesn't, like Thomas, just make a policy statement. I mean, she goes into looking at, like, the way that Roberts is actually looking at this, and she says, like, essentially, a doctor cannot know whether this treatment is banned or not unless the doctor knows the biological sex of their patient. That a doctor does not know that he cannot prescribe testosterone to a patient unless he knows the biological sex of the patient. And so how can Roberts then say this is not a sex-based classification? It is like, I mean, it's really amazing. When I was writing on Thursday about this, I was looking back at some of those 2023 decisions from Trump appointees. There's a Trump appointee in Tennessee and a Trump appointee in Indiana who both issued injunctions blocking those states' respective bans. And neither of them seemed particularly confused about these cases. The Judge Hanlon in Indiana wrote a rather short opinion in light of the fact that 2 years later, this is a 120 pages of Supreme Court opinions. And then when Judge Eli Richardson in Tennessee wrote it, his opinion was a couple weeks later. And at that point, he pointed out, The district courts are unanimous about this. Several judges have looked at this now, and we all agree. And he said, if I thought I should be an outlier, I would. But
tell me if I understand
I shouldn't be.
Chris, when all the district courts, all the appellate courts agree, that's usually not something that goes up to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court wants it to percolate, and if you get a whole bunch of different law, then they decide. Right, but here we didn't have that.
Well, the appeals courts did flip.
The appeals court later
once
did.
Once it got up to the appeals courts, both the 11th Circuit and Sixth Circuit had ruled against. Had overturned district court rulings, and that did conflict with the Eighth Circuit, which had earlier upheld an injunction against Arkansas's ban. And so we did have a circuit split, and importantly, this was back during the Biden administration still, and the Biden administration intervened in the Tennessee litigation. And so it was both the plaintiffs represented by private lawyers and organizational lawyers and the U.S. government who asked the Supreme Court to take this up because at that point in you essentially had, the 4 states of the Sixth Circuit, the 3 states of the 11th Circuit. You were likely eventually going to get a ruling probably from the Fifth Circuit, potentially even en banc from the Eighth Circuit. And so the decision was made, and there's been some criticism of that this week. I would be glad to go into, but essentially, this was something that was going to be affecting thousands of families across probably around a dozen or more states. And eventually we were going to, if nothing else, most certainly get a conflicting ruling when Idaho's law, which is within the Ninth Circuit, would have reached a final resolution. And so, eventually this would have gone to the Supreme Court. And so that's the bottom line answer to all of that whole side debate that is now happening.
So I'm just outraged about this for 2 very different reasons. One is I think every human being is a human being. Trans human beings, just like people who aren't trans human beings, and that we treat them differently as pariahs, as not allowed to be covered by equal protection, is just wrong. That's one. 2, I just think even for people who, and there are plenty in America who aren't comfortable with the idea of trans human beings, just aren't. And that's a fact, I guess. But even if that's you, I'm talking on the radio here, even if you're one of those people, the idea that our Supreme Court can bend the law, can bend the plain meaning of the Constitution this way for overtly political reasons threatens other kinds of freedoms that you care about. So be really careful with this one. This is a really dangerous decision.
Yeah, if this is how, if you're allowed to sort of talk around whether a law that, if you asked 100 people if Tennessee's law targets trans people, 98 of them or more are going to say obviously.
Obviously.
It's such a
and some of them are even going to say that's what we wanted it to do.
Right. Well, exactly. Yeah. Right. That's what I mean. Both sides. That's the thing. It's both sides agree. The conservative lawmakers behind it certainly said so, and the Democrats who voted against it also said so. So it's this how do the only 6 people in the country claiming that this doesn't, well, and I should actually be like, it's one of those, the meme, like, you don't have to hand it to Alito. But like, I mean, like, for the first time probably you've ever had me on your show, Edwin, like, Sam Alito on Wednesday was like, I don't know what they're talking about on that front, on that small front. Like, he said he didn't quite buy the argument that this doesn't classify based on transgender status. Now, at the end of the day, he said, I don't think transgender status should get heightened scrutiny. Therefore, it should be considered under a rational basis, and it would therefore still be allowed. Right. But, like, I mean, he even sort of, like, called yes on this idea that 5 of the justices, his 5 conservative brethren, were claiming that this does not classify based on sex, based on transgender status.
All right, Chris, we have like 4 minutes left, and I have a whole bunch of other things to talk about with you, which we've kind of lost the thread on a little bit. Just, are they going to do anything on birthright citizenship this term?
I mean, birthright citizenship, it is important to remember that the case that the arguments that they heard were just over the scope of the injunction, whether or not nationwide injunctions are appropriate. And essentially what sort of was being teased out at arguments is that if you do decide that nationwide injunctions, even in this case, need to be limited, you then need to hold arguments on the merits of this executive order. And so I think, honestly, what we're going to get is either a ruling that limits nationwide injunctions but says that, like, this meets whatever those standards are, or they're going to say you can't have nationwide injunctions. The only way really to have a nationwide injunction is to have a class action lawsuit where you have a certified class. And because of that, we're going to keep this on hold over the summer and hold arguments over the merits of the executive order in the fall. So I don't think I think those are the 2 possibilities.
Okay, well, with that in mind, our friend Judge Kaczmarek, and those of you who are listening may remember that name, he is the outlier, like 11 standard deviations to the right in Texas. And this time he said, forget HIPAA, those laws that protect you, protect your health privacy. If you go to a doctor and talk about abortion, that has to be made public so the authorities can track you down. I assume that his reign of issuing nationwide injunctions and nationwide rulings, it will be over too. This court won't just say, oh no, it's only when it's against Trump, will they?
I mean, in a rare defense of the court, they have pulled back both Kaczmarek and Judge Reed O'Connor, who's the other one down there who has a single division district. They have pulled back their nationwide injunctions. In addition to class action, though, not to delve too deep into things, there's also a side issue that's waiting out there that will need to be resolved about actions under the Administrative Procedure Act when you challenge a regulation. One of the things that you can ask for in that litigation is to vacate the rule. And the question, if they pull back nationwide injunctions, is does that include the APA actions?
Really interesting.
Can you have both class actions to have nationwide effect, and can you bring APA actions to have nationwide effects?
That's
or
interesting.
Are they going to say that even when you vacate a rule, if you're a district court judge, you can only vacate it in your district?
All right, Chris, wait a minute. We got 1 minute left. I want 1 minute.
Yeah.
We were on the verge of, I think, Judge Boasberg thinking about contempt when it comes to the way the administration is talking in his court about the people they're deporting.
Yeah.
Where are we with the courts and deportations and the administration's ability to comply with what they've been told to do?
That's the Boasberg issue about the March 15th flights and whether there should be contempt proceedings there are on hold before the D.C. circuit because the administration appeals. With Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who's now back in the U.S., although being charged in Tennessee, DOJ has asked for the Maryland case that was trying to get him brought back to be dismissed. But there is relief that was asked for, and the questions about whether they were complying with that could keep that case alive there. And then there's the question about the effort to fly the 6, 7, or 8 people to South Sudan who are now in Djibouti at the U.S. military base there. And that's before the judge in Massachusetts in a case over what's called third country removals. And that is also still in play, what he is going to what that judge is going to do as to he's focused first on the remedy for the actual people and getting their ability to challenge that removal, but he has kept as a live issue the question of whether there will be other responses to their failure to follow his preliminary injunction there.
All right. So those for all of you listening to this,
cases that I know of,
there is no question I can ask Chris, no matter how niche about what's going on, it affects our country, that he's not going to have a full answer for, which is why you have to read Law Dork. It's just the best way to understand and to keep up with the important cases that are going to that govern the fight we're in. Chris, as always, I'm deeply grateful. Edwin. Really grateful.
No,
thank you. Yep. Bye. All right, everybody. We're going to do something very different when we come back, and I will explain what that is as soon as we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we're going to do something a little bit different. Somebody flipped the tables on me this week, and instead of me doing the interviewing, somebody interviewed me. And it was fun and interesting. It was the Lincoln Project, and I thought Susan Demas was a good interviewer, and I just think it's interesting enough. I want to give that to you. So here it is.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor of Lincoln Square. And joining me today is Edwin Eisendrath. He is the former CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times, my hometown paper. And he currently hosts a radio show in Chicago and writes It's the Democracy Stupid Substack, which you should definitely subscribe to. But that's not all that Edwin has done. He's a former Chicago alderman. He has been a public school teacher in Chicago, a HUD regional administrator. So looking forward to catching up with you about all of the news this week. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Susan. I'm thrilled to be here, even though I'm used to radio and a little worried about what it's going to look like when people actually see me doing this.
You know what? We're all on this ride together, and so far, so good.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking a little bit about the No Kings protests over the weekend, and I know you were at just the massive one in Chicago. Were there like 200,000 people? What's the estimate?
You know what? I don't know what the estimate is. It was so big. It was, it spilled, we have this big public square that's often used in Chicago for rallies, but it's spilled out all around the streets, all around it. And 200,000 sounds probably about right. I mean, I know from, previous, that square fills at 80 or 90,000, and it was everywhere. I mean, it was blocks and blocks. And people were thrilled to be there. I mean, you take the L downtown in Chicago. Right? The L is filled with people, packed on a Saturday. Unusual.
Yeah, usually it's only like that if you're going to a Cubs game or something.
Right? And everybody's talking about their signs and why they're there. I mean, it was a warm and loving gathering. I don't think anybody heard what the speakers were saying, and I don't think they cared. They wanted to be there because they love our country, and they're angry about the efforts to undermine it. And this is different than I'm an advocate for climate justice. I'm an advocate for healthcare. I'm an advocate for housing. That goes on in D.C., and that's how our political parties organize. But that's not what the organizing out in the street is. It's Americans who do not want to see this country turned into a dictatorship by that felon in the White House.
Right. Yeah, I saw a lot of people who, it was their first protest. This is not, something that they, do every weekend. Mm-hmm. Some people who, even voted for Donald Trump. But, this is not what they expected. And, God bless them. We have the right to protest still in America, and you have the right to change your mind, and everyone should be welcome into the fold.
Yes, well, this is not a doctrinaire moment. This is you fight this war with any soldier who's willing to stand next to you. And that's, I'm proud to do that. I'm proud to stand with people that I disagree with, but who love our country, love our democracy, and are not interested in the absolute erosion of it, which they are doing. And we should talk about what they're doing in Congress to further erode it. Because, what they're doing is a crime, whether it's illegal or not, right? They're using legal means like lots of fascists do to take control.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, this is probably a good time for us to talk about Trump's budget bill, which, could be up for a vote in the Senate as soon as next week. And, by some accounts, the Senate version is even worse than what passed in the House. You wrote an excellent column that we published where you described the bill is putting Project 2025 into law and as a tyrant's dream come true, which I thought was a great encapsulation of the stakes of this. So talk to us about how the bill does that.
Yeah. Well, let's first talk about how we talk about the bill, because again, they call it the big, beautiful bill. So we fall into the trap. We say it's the big, ugly bill. Right. But either way, that's them dictating how we talk. Right. And there are people who say it's the kill bill. I get that, and I appreciate that because it will definitely murder people for sure. Mm-hmm. But what Americans understand after our last campaign is what Project 2025 is, and no one likes it. And yet this bill enacts many of its provisions. Right. But it has other things. And let's just take a minute on those provisions because they're terrible. Yeah. Right? They strip Americans of health care. They are going to poison our climate. They're going to do all those things that they promised to do. They're going to make our government even more under the control of the executive branch than it already is.
Yeah, it's a huge power grab.
There's a provision in it that says that the judicial branch no longer has the power to hold them in contempt. And what that means is since Congress has already given up their power, they have, but they've ceded it. They've said, we're all in with this takeover of the government, this coup. So what they've done is said the judicial branch, well, how dare they? Even our own appointees are ruling against us. Mm-hmm. We just have to have the ability to ignore what they're doing. Right. And once they do that, in a stroke of a pen, once that's signed into law, then every executive order this tyrant puts on the plate is going to be the law of the land. We will be no different than North Korea, than any monarchy where what the king says is law. And he wants to do it. I mean, it was just 2 days ago that he said, well, Great Britain is safe. Why? Because I like them. Seriously? That's how that's what this man is?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, this is a huge rewrite of the Constitution, all in a bill. No more separation of powers. What Trump says goes. And I mean, that is extraordinarily radical.
It's not a rewrite. It's a burning down. It's just burn it up. Right. It's just we're going to pick one man, and that man will then rule over all of us. And by the way, once he rules, you can forget ever kicking him out. That's the deal they made in Hungary. He's been there forever. That's
right, with Viktor Orban.
He's been there forever. Once you say to somebody, you get to make all the rules, well, guess what? They make the rules around elections too, and your votes don't. They have elections.
They make the rules so they can always win.
That's right. So elections won't matter. The media, they've already got most of, not all of it, thank goodness. There's an independent media. You're part of it. I'm part of it. Right. But the big legacy media has caved.
Yeah.
Deals that cave because they have these other corporate interests. So I want to see, by the way, one of the things I loved, and you're in this part of the country, I love the Midwest. We are not going to put up with, I have this niche that I care about, and I know how the game works, and I'm going to work and get my little niche taken care of. We're like in it to win it for the whole thing. We want our democracy back, and we're not going to put up with this. And we're tougher than some of our counterparts on the coast. We know how to.
Yeah, we have winter 6 months out of the year.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, elections go through the Midwest. We know that. And so, if you're losing the heartland, then you're losing America. And I think we saw over the weekend that Trump is definitely in jeopardy of that. And so we have to build on that momentum.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned the media, and especially with Trump's failure of a parade this weekend, where the White House said 250,000 people showed up. We all know that that's a gross exaggeration. Yet I read story after story about his massive parade. It just seems like the media just keeps bending the knee, even though the American public is getting sick of it. So, what do we do about this huge issue with, the mainstream corporate media that, is not fulfilling their duty, to be a part of this democracy, to be the guardian of the First Amendment and tell the truth?
Well, we do what you're doing and what I do. Look, Americans can find good information if they want to look for it. They have to turn off Fox. They have to turn off OCN. They have to read past the troubling headlines you see in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Mm-hmm. The headline writing is appalling. But we have to hold up reality. I mean, and reality, has a nasty way of intervening. I mean, rural hospitals are going to close.
Right, with all these Medicaid cuts.
And this base of Trump's is going to go, wait, what happened? That cannot be Joe Biden's fault that rural hospitals are closing 3 years later. He can't do it. He owns this mess. And he can distract us as much as he wants by threatening to bomb Iran. By the way, even George Bush, after 9/11, went to Congress to get permission for the Iraq war, as he's required to do by law. Right. So he isn't going to, I don't think he's going to violate the Constitution by declaring war himself like a king does. But it's a distraction in order to get this terrible bill passed, in order to take more power. And we have to keep our eye on the ball. They want legally to strip everyone of their rights and only have the king have power. And that's that's not an exaggeration. That's not nonsense. Read the bill. They're going to sell off in the Senate bill. Mike Lee, the man who was so sensitive, right? After this.
Right. About the assassinations in Minnesota.
Yes. He lied about it. He politicized it. He's a pig. But he also now, is the head of a very important committee in Congress. He wants to sell off all our public lands. You want to go to the Grand Canyon? Ask the trust if you're allowed to.
Which is what it used to be. You used to have to pay a toll if you wanted to hike down the Grand Canyon. Yeah. He wants to bring those robber baron days back.
And sell off mandatory sale of all our public lands. So they want to, kill the healthcare system to save money. They want to not pay for any of the emergency services, FEMA, all that we do after a terrible flood, a hurricane.
Right.
They want to cut They don't want to spend the money on our health care. They don't want to spend the money on our education. They don't want to spend the money on interagency cooperation, the stuff that makes the government well. What are they saving the money for? To give billionaires more money. And let me ask you, Susan, what if you gave Elon Musk another $1 billion, what could he buy he can't buy today?
Right.
It doesn't change life, not an iota, but it affects all the rest of our lives. That's how greedy they are.
Yeah. And the bill doesn't even pay for itself. I mean, it's going to add, trillions to our national debt, which, at one point Republicans, claimed that they cared about. But, and Elon Musk's big problem with the bill is it just doesn't cut things enough. Of course, it's not the problem with the massive tax cuts that he does not need.
Right. Look, we're past the point where we can say with a straight face, well, Republicans used to say they were for, now they're against. Mm-hmm. They are all in on Donald Trump's project to destroy the country, to take it over, to make it his personal piggy bank. And he already profited enormously from this job, illegally and enormously. But we can't hold him accountable because he's taken the Justice Department and made it his personal law firm.
Right.
All of this is unacceptable to the great majority of Americans who are showing up in the streets, who are wringing out their hands going, what am I supposed to do? And our response is through elections, and they are on a schedule. I mean, if we could dump the man tomorrow, we would.
Right.
But we don't get to do that. But if we take back the House, maybe we will have, a really meaningful look at his administration, and maybe we will get the Senate to have some courage. I doubt it, because the Republican Party's dead, the one we grew up with. What's in its place? It's been taken over by this autocratic monster.
Right. But being as, the next elections, for most of us, not if you're in New Jersey or Virginia, but, it's not until next fall. So in the meantime, what can we do to stop this horrible bill? Because we cannot afford for this to pass.
Well, we have to lean on every senator, not just the Republicans. We have to lean on the Democratic senators, too. They have to fight like they have never fought because the democracy's on the line. You give this man the powers that are in those bills, and you've just created a dictatorship. Now, dictatorships fall. Don't get me wrong. I think Americans love their democracy and ultimately will win it back. But we can't call ourselves a democracy if they pass this bill. We will have given one man ultimate power to make every decision. And by the way, those decisions include coercive powers, and we're already seeing him test those limits. Oh, I'm going to send the Marines to L.A. There's no emergency.
No.
As you and I are speaking, the Ninth Circuit is hearing this case, and they're likely to say the president has the power without any cause to federalize the National Guard and use force in a jurisdiction. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible.
Yeah. Can you imagine if this was something that Barack Obama tried to do? I mean, the Tea Party would have, had a massive collective coronary over this. But, the rules are different when you have a Republican president.
Well, we have a massive collective outpouring against it, much bigger than the party ever had just last week.
America, for sure.
Right? I mean, let the right wing understand this. They aren't the only ones who can organize. They aren't the only ones who can get angry. And you know what? We aren't the only ones who are going to pay a price. Because when we win, Mar-a-Lago will become the next Smithsonian Museum for American fascism. We'll take it away from that asshole. Pardon me.
No, you can say it.
We are going to have to say there is a price to pay when you try and take down the greatest democracy in the world, and we are going to make them pay it. By the way, I want their voices in a working legislator because we should argue about what are the best policies to move us forward. But I'm sorry, we are not arguing about and not ceding the democracy so that we can never have those arguments.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, I have to say, I share your anger. And, I think that a lot of us who believe in democracy, who might be on the, more on the left side of the spectrum, we're always trying to find common ground. We want to get along with our neighbors. We believe in the two-party system, but when you threaten everything that we hold dear, when July 4th, becomes a day of mourning instead of a day of celebration, because of what this president is trying to do to our country, that's not okay. And anger is a natural reaction to this. And, I think that can help fuel us, as well as, leaning on those values where we do want to meet with our neighbors and talk with them and say, hey, we don't agree on everything, but we agree that this is going way too far and we need to preserve the country that we all love.
And I think, 75, 80% of the country is there, agrees on it. And the 20% who don't, I am ready to take the steamroller and roll right over them. You know what? They think the earth is flat. They think, oil will make us air better forever. They're wrong. And let's call them wrong and move on. Because the right wing has been, nothing will get in the way of their wanting to win. They don't care what they burn down to win. Just think about Jim Jordan's hearings over the last few years, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, Hunter Biden had a laptop. I'm sorry. He had a laptop. This guy's got a Qatari jet, right? They don't care. They do not care. But they're willing to weaponize everything and make everyone angry forever. Well, you know what? Time to call the BS and time to turn the tables, because they are dangerous. And I don't want to go where they went. I don't want to give anyone on our side license to pick up a gun and do the thing that they are licensing people to do. I mean, Donald Trump went on Truth Social. By the way, the Russian word for truth is Pravda. That's their news agency. Makes perfect, right? He went there the night of this shooting and posted that Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York are taking illegal aliens and using them to win votes and try and steal our democracy. He's a liar. He is fomenting violence every step of the way. This is going to get worse before it gets better, but they are to blame. They are completely to blame. There is no middle ground on this, Susan, and we should not let them try it. What about Hunter Biden's laptop? Shut up. It's time to tell them that reality is here and they are not taking our democracy, period.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we should talk about that, because we do have this perpetual right-wing outrage machine about, everything, and it's about generating liberal tears. But it goes way beyond that, because, we are seeing this growing problem of political violence on the right, and it starts with Trump dispatching, the military, along with these masked ICE agents who won't even identify themselves as they're rounding up people, including elected officials, Democratic elected officials. They're trying to push this as far as they can. But, over the weekend, as we talked about, there were these assassinations and assassination attempts against lawmakers in Minnesota, and with dozens of other lawmakers on the person's hit list. We had at least 2 separate instances of men who drove through No Kings protests over the weekend, one in Virginia, one in Riverside, California. And we've seen this happening with more and more frequency, because there are laws passed in a lot of these red states that, basically gives people permission to do that because, they've lessened the penalties so much. And then, we on top of all of this, we have people like Mike Lee and other MAGA leaders who are just stoking the flames of violence. So, I think we need to talk about how dangerous the situation is, especially when you see, Trump on down condoning and trying to stoke this sort of anger. I feel like we're going to see more and more instances of violence, and that's terrifying.
I agree with you, Susan. I agree with you. Bloody Kansas was a precursor to a civil war, right? These people will have a civil war rather than have a democracy. They are just like those Southern enslavers who said, our power, our property matters more than anything that was ever written in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. We don't believe that all people are created equal. And by the way, they don't. Let's just be clear about this. I mean, they don't. They're willing to be violent. And we're going to be better. There are more of us. and we're going to call them out on it. They don't get to play both sides. There aren't very good people on both sides of what happened in Minnesota. There aren't.
What do we do in this moment? Because, our power is to assemble and to keep building this movement. But, clearly, Trump is willing to send in the troops to try and, put down demonstrations in LA and other places. Other people, are taking the cues, from his violent rhetoric and taking matters into their own hands. So what do we do to be smart about everything as we're trying to fight back?
Well, be brave. Be brave. I mean, there are things that are worth fighting for. And so many of our young people over the course of our history have given their lives for this democracy. We can go out and stand out, and risk some angry people. It's worth it. There's this little book. It's a good book on tyranny. I suggest read it. A lot of good advice there, including don't obey. Don't because he says you have to do it. That doesn't mean you have to do it, right? We have to organize. We have to hold each other up. And by the way, you have to take time out because the outrage will burn us up, and we aren't them. We aren't them. So take time out, read a novel, walk your dog, play the piano, sing a song, right? Stand at the beach, and then come back and fight this fight because we are in it for a long time. We have to get through to at least 2 more elections. And we have to make sure those elections are fair and that the votes are counted. And then after they're counted, that they are meaningful. And by the way, these executive orders are groundwork for them saying you can't be seated if you were elected from Illinois into Congress because you didn't follow my executive order, which have to make it impossible for women to vote if they have a different last name than the one they were born with.
Right.
I mean, this is stuff they're really doing. Yeah. And they're planning on using. So we need to be smart, but we need to be tough, and we need to care about each other. And by the way, that protest this weekend was lovely. I mean, they are angry with Donald Trump, but they love this democracy, and they're supporting each other and helping each other through it, because people are angry and they're upset. And so I think we're going to be okay, but we have to be, as tough as you and I and these Midwesterners who suffer through these winters are, right? And not ideological and not, narrow focused on one issue or another that you're willing to horse trade over, but laser focused on the big picture. This is what matters. We need to save this democracy for all the other reasons. And I don't know. Lincoln was from here.
Yes. We're big fans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to talk just, before we go about your governor, J.B. Pritzker, because first of all, he's an actual billionaire. And he has really emerged as being on the front lines of opposing Trump, drawing on his family history of, fleeing from the Ukraine and the pogroms. And, it seems to me like he's really kind of met this moment. What is it like as someone who lives in Illinois, and do you think that he has a role to play in 2028 on the national stage?
Well, let me just start with a full disclosure. I've known JB since we were both little, and I'm fond of him. He's very smart. He may come from a billionaire family, but it's a family with very good values. Mm-hmm. That doesn't. So he didn't grow up like everybody else, because you don't if you're a billionaire. But they've got the good values, and that matters, and it makes him different than Eric Trump, right? He has chosen this lane, the lane of tip of the spear, and I don't know what will ultimately produce our standard bearer at the next.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I got some very good feedback after interviewing the Center of American Progress's Andrea Ducasse about health policy a couple of weeks ago. And, American Progress is a really important organization, and I admit I haven't done enough to share their amazing talent and their amazing work with you. And that is going to change right now because I want you to meet Bobby Kogan. Bobby is their Senior Director of Federal Budget Policy. Imagine that, federal budget policy. But before that, he worked at the White House. He was their advisor to the director of OMB under the Biden administration. And before that, he staffed the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget. So he is, as you can imagine, an expert on things that, none of us really understand. Aggregate spending, revenue, interest, deficits, debt, the bird bath. We're going to talk about all that stuff. He's also got his arms around those dark, arcane arts of reconciliation and scorekeeping. Bobby, welcome.
Edwin, thanks so much for having me on.
I'm thrilled that you're here. The House passed the worst piece of legislation I can remember and sent it to the Senate to start this budget reconciliation process. Their bill puts Project 2025 into law. It plainly hurts Americans everywhere. But you know what? The Senate doesn't usually make things better. So I'd love to get your sense of where we are and what are some of the, outstanding things you think people need to know.
Yeah, that's right. So the House passed bill would be the single largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in a single law in U.S. history. And right now we've seen the text of the Senate, the various committees that have produced kind of their parts of it. And the Senate's the same, right? Maybe the SNAP cuts are a little less extreme. The Medicaid cuts are a little more extreme, but kind of the broad contours are the same. This would be enormous cuts to nutrition assistance, enormous cuts to health insurance, kicking 10 plus million people off their health insurance. And then enormous tax cuts for the rich. You put it all together. The poor get poorer, the rich get richer.
Yeah, I just don't understand it because, you take these billionaires, you make them a little richer. That doesn't change their lives. There's nothing they can do, but it makes a dramatic difference for the rest of us. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, for the top 0.1% are getting nearly $300,000 in additional tax cuts, right? But
it's like a tip for them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. But you take the people who are losing, right? They're out your Medicaid, and then all of a sudden, you can't take care of yourself, right? The folks on these programs already are incredibly poor, and the benefits tend to be pretty meager, right? So you take SNAP. The average SNAP benefit is $2 per meal, per person per meal. That's it, right? It's not really enough to help people get by. But then you're out all that aid, and then you can't afford food. So where we are now is the Senate is doing what's called a bird bath. They are fighting about whether the various provisions are allowed.
Hang on. Okay. I know that that's named after Senator Byrd, but let's just tell everybody, this has to do with what's allowed in reconciliation.
Yeah, that's right. So in the House, you can do whatever you want. But in the Senate, normally you can filibuster. It takes 60 votes to do anything in the Senate, except there are a few pieces of legislation, a few things that can make it past the filibuster. This is one of them, reconciliation. So you can pass it with only 51 votes. That means even if all Democrats vote against it, they can still pass it. But it needs to stick to the specific rules of reconciliation. And that's the fight that's happening right now. The Senate is, the staff of the various committees are going in front of the parliamentarian and they're fighting. Yes, I think this provision passes muster. No, I think it violates the Byrd Rule, which, as you said, was named after Robert Byrd, to try to further limit the sorts of things that could make it through reconciliation.
And Democrats are fighting hard, and we're winning those fights, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I would just say we've won on some pretty uphill stuff. Republicans wanted to completely defund the CFPB, oh my goodness.
Consumer Financial Protection.
Yeah, that's right. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. My goodness. So Republicans wanted to completely defund it, get rid of its permanent funding stream. I think that was an uphill battle for us, but we won not only on defunding it, but it seems as if we really won on even lowering the amount of funding that it could get. So that's huge. While Trump is sabotaging it now, this would have completely rendered it inoperable in future administrations. And so that was a huge victory. Just last night, it was announced that we won on the SNAP state share. And they were going to force significant portions of the cost onto states. States would have responded by maybe dropping some eligibility, dropping some of the some kind of level of assistance, and then maybe even during tough years dropping out of the program entirely, dooming all their citizens to just not get any food assistance. So it was a huge victory. Now Republicans will try to then tweak the language, see if a different version is able to make it through. But these things are great. I mean, one of the things that we really benefit on here is that the Democratic staff are just much better at this than the Republican staff. And so we win on more things than, if they had better staff, we'd be able to.
Bobby, I have two kinds of questions about this. One, staying with the Senate for a minute, will the Republican Senate abide by the rulings of the parliamentarian that come out of the bird bath? We live in such a lawless time with this MAGA crowd that they could very well just say, yeah, well, those were more guidelines, really. We don't have to pay attention.
Yeah, so I think the answer is probably yes on all of it, with one asterisk. The reason I want to say probably yes is that, the whole point of reconciliation is it says you can do it without the filibuster as long as you stick to the rules. Yeah. If you then say you can do it without the filibuster and there are no rules, then you have nuked the filibuster by another name. You've done it, it's kind of a weird process, but what you have done is, reconciliation says ignore the filibuster, stick to the rules. And this says, while there are no rules, then you've nuked the filibuster. And I think the Republicans legitimately are earnestly uncomfortable with that concept. The asterisk here is, I don't want to go into it too much, but basically Republicans are trying to pretend that their tax cuts are free. Just the tax cut portion is free. They have a reason, it's wrong, but they have a reason why they think that is why they think they ought to be able to do that. And they think that they will be able to convince the parliamentarian to let them have it be officially, I'm doing heavy scare quotes, be officially estimated that way. If they lose on that, I think there's a decent chance that they overrule the parliamentarian just on that limited one. I think in the other stuff, the conventional wisdom here is that they are planning to abide by the parliamentarian's rulings.
Okay. All right. And the other then is, if Democrats win enough of these fights, that means the House goes back to the House different. The House is they have their own weird dynamics, and they can only afford to lose a couple of votes. But this will become much more expensive. And there is this caucus. I don't pretend you can get in the head of these crazy Freedom Caucus people. But is there a chance some of them will walk?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? So the House, the state share that the House passed was $128 billion of their savings. It was, more than a third of their SNAP savings. Without that, politics might get a lot tougher. And I'll just say we're going to win on some of the Medicaid stuff, right? That's going to be argued tomorrow. We'll get the results a few days later, but I'm positive we're going to win on some of the nasty Medicaid things they want to do. How many of them can they fix and get a version of it through? Just one example, in 2017, when Republicans were trying to repeal the ACA, their first version of defunding Planned Parenthood failed. We beat that in the bird test and in the bird bath. And then they changed it, and their second version was able to pass muster. So if Republicans can slow down, which, they might not want to slow down, but if they can slow down, they might be able to fix some of these, or at least get them good enough for their liking. If they're going at breakneck speed, the stuff falls out, and then they might have big problems in the House.
Are you betting that we will end up with another CR, or are you betting that they will find a way to come together and pass this because they'll get so much of what they want?
I think that they will pass something. I don't know how much of it will fall. Yeah, so I think they're basically guaranteed to be able to pass some sort of tax something. I don't know how much of the spending falls out. I think we should be fighting with all our might. We didn't think we were going to win on ACA repeal. And then it turned out that we did win on ACA repeal. So I think we should be fighting with all our might on this. It's totally possible that we kill significant portions of this. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think it's worth the fight. We owe it to the people. I guarantee you, everyone listening right now, someone who will be really hurt by this bill. It could be you, it could be your family, it could be one of your neighbors, or it could be an acquaintance, but someone who's on Medicaid or SNAP who would lose their Medicaid or SNAP and be worse off. And we owe it to them. And then just to be really clear, we also owe it to the people we will never meet. There are tons of people that we will never meet in our entire lives that will be hurt by this. And so we owe it to them to try with all our might. I do think that they will probably be able to get something through, but it's our job to make sure that it's the least bad that it possibly can be.
And the deficit that they're going to leave us with, I'm comfortable with some level of deficit, and I don't know where I stop being comfortable. I don't think anybody knows really where they stop being comfortable, but it's not like it's an irrelevant idea. And this is a huge hole they're creating. Save Social Security, which, has already got financial issues, and Medicare, which already has long-term issues, if we have, this enormous additional debt that we'll be carrying.
Yeah, that's right. I'm pretty dovey when it comes to these things, but just to put a magnitude on kind of how large kind of the deficit impact is right now. The measure that a lot of fiscal folks tend to look at is something called the fiscal gap. It's kind of how much pressure there is on our debt to GDP, like how hard it is, how fast it's going up, and how hard it would be to kind of like balance that. And right now, the fiscal gap is 2% of GDP, and their bill would make it, more than a third worse, really, like maybe 50% worse, depending on the version. And so we're talking about significantly increasing the upward pressure and the debt trajectory, which is not an ideal thing to do. And I just say, there's good debt and there's good debt and there's bad debt. Debt to make sure that people aren't starving to death is great debt. Debt to give the richest Americans an even bigger tax break is bad debt.
Yeah, good debt is debt that helps us grow in ways that are consonant with our values. And our society gives our society different, social strength as well, cohesion. The debt they're doing, we now know this, giving the rich another tax break doesn't lead to economic growth in the way that we thought. Trickle down isn't quite what they thought 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But what else is hiding in here? They're not getting rid of subsidies for oil and gas, are they? Those are in there.
No, they're not getting rid of existing subsidies. And in fact, this one isn't oil and gas, but they're actually doing huge additional subsidies for farmers, right? So they are helping mega agro businesses while taking away food. And that was actually part of their point. They said, oh my gosh, if we're taking away food from the poor, then there will be lower profits for the farmers. So we should just we should take away food from the poor and then just subsidize the farmers for their loss.
Right, which is what Trump did the last time too.
That's right.
Trade policy hurts farmers, and so what's in it for folks like me who live in a city?
Yeah, there's, as with many of the tax cuts, there's a smidgen for most of us, and there's a lot for the rich, right? There's that was kind of the Bush model too, right? He gave a little bit to a lot of people, and so then people would feel happy they got a tiny bit. The average benefit for folks making below 100K on average is $14 a week. So that is more than zero. But that's a lot less than something you do to kind of, if you were struggling to get ahead. And on the flip side, the stuff for the richest is really quite large.
Well, and what will this do to the American economy?
Yeah. So it's funny. centrist groups, center-left groups, and center-right groups find that this would, over the long run, really, really hurt the economy, and actually even within 10 years. So they found there's this concept known as dynamic scoring. That's where Republicans say, oh, God, well, I do these tax cuts, but they help the economy so much that they come and pay for themselves. So the Congressional Budget Office, which, is kind of straight shooting, Yale Budget, which I think is a centrist group, but was staffed by a lot of Biden alums, and then Penn Wharton, which I think is pretty centristy, but is staffed by a bunch of right wingers, kind of all looked at this, and they all found that when you take into account the effect on the economy and also interest rates, the bill is actually more expensive, not less expensive. And they find that over the long run, it saps growth. GDP is much lower. And what does that mean? Well, they say that means people's wages are lower. If wage growth is slower than it otherwise would have been, you get lower raises than you would have otherwise gotten. And they say so much so that people on average just end up behind. They say, so yes, you're getting a tiny tax cut, 14 bucks a week, but you're going to have lost out so much in foregone raises or lower raises that you're going to come out behind. And like that is something that's pretty inexcusable.
Okay, but really, we don't have to worry about any of that, right? Because the budget gap is going to be completely filled by the trillions of dollars that are coming in, obviously, since we've been told this, from the tariffs, right? From the tax on trade.
It's funny. So when you incorporate tariffs, as written, the bill on average makes the bottom 30% of America poorer. If you incorporate the effect of tariffs, it makes the bottom 80% of America poorer. The 90th decile ends up basically even, and it would be only the top 10% of America that ends up richer. Right? So yeah, if we assume that all the tariffs are happening, then in that case, it actually still increases the deficit, but it increases the deficit by less. But what happens is it's a giant tax paid by a bunch of Americans who are then worse off, right? So that's how you end up where it's a net tax increase on almost everyone. And you take that into account, and then obviously all their lost benefits, and people just end up way, 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 way behind.
Well, Bobby, what are the Republicans? What are they saying that this bill does that's any good? Are they just not saying anything?
Yeah.
It makes Trump happy. That's all I hear.
That's right. I mean, one of the new provisions is called Trump account. So definitely there's a lot in this bill that is just targeted. They have an audience of one, which is Trump. A lot of them just lie about what's in the bill, right? So they say that it actually is going to boost growth a huge amount, and then it's going to pay for itself. They say that actually no one will be kicked off their health insurance. That's just moochers, which is a lie, but it's something they say. They say, oh, well, actually the tax cuts are supposed to be considered free. So when you account for that, then it doesn't reduce, it's just a bunch of nonsense for them to defend this really bad bill. But and I guess I would just say, they were really, really, really close to passing ACA repeal, which, like this, would kick millions of people off their health insurance while doing giant tax cuts for the rich. And they were just one vote away from doing that. So I would say that there are, it's a fundamental moral difference in what we think the government is for. Do you think the government is there to help alleviate suffering and take care of people who are struggling? Or do you think the government is there to do nothing, right? And I think these folks think that the government should do less. It should cover fewer people. And of course, they get exasperated, right? When I think the real effects, right? The estimate is that this bill would lead to 10,000 additional people dying every single year, right? These are the people who would have had coverage but don't have coverage because of this. And then of those people who would have had coverage but don't have coverage, some of them get extremely sick. And of the people who get extremely sick, some of them spend out of pocket and take care of themselves, and some can't. And of the people who can't, some of them die. And if you say, oh, well, you're killing people, they get really mad at you, but it's basic logic. And the truth is that they don't think that $1 trillion is worth saving a bunch of people and giving a bunch of other people health insurance. They don't think that that's a good trade-off. And those of us with a conscience do think that it's a good trade-off.
You know what? I think I'm fundamentally the immorality of it is appalling. But they also, I thought, cared about economic growth. They thought, at the end of the day, not next year, but in 10 years, even the wealthiest rely on the American economy being strong. And nothing in this bill strengthens the American economy.
Yeah, it's funny. The Tax Foundation is a center-right group, and I think they said that it was the complete opposite of tax reform. Even if, there are obviously a lot of those folks believe in just lowering taxes or whatever, but the bill as written makes our tax code not just like less fair, but it also at a kind of structural level makes it significantly less efficient and saps a lot of growth. Look, I would just say these people have an audience of one. Trump really wanted this, and it's his big agenda, and they are willing to go ahead. You are right. The rich benefit from having an economy that works really, really well. This is going to sap their growth. But for the super rich, their tax cuts will make up for it. For the super duper rich, even with the lost kind of like economic growth, they have such enormous tax cuts that they end up better off. And those are that includes many members of Congress. That includes many of their donors. That includes the people who they talk to. A lot of these folks, it's very clear, have never met a single person on Medicaid. When they try to describe who's going to be hurt and how and who's not going to be hurt and how it works, it's very clear that they don't know a single person on Medicaid. But they know a bunch of people who get giant tax cuts.
Wow, that says terrible things about our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, maybe I'm coming off too cynical here, but it's very, very, very clear when the indignancy that they have when under questioning, right? If you watch any of their markups and people talked about the Medicaid cuts, and you listen to the rebuttal from the GOP members who had written those provisions, it's very, very clear that they do not know what they're talking about and don't know the effect on people, and they don't care to, right? Because it's actually much easier if you don't know that you're harming people. It's a much happier, better place if you don't really understand just how bad what you're doing is. But the reality is this would rip food away from families with kids as young as 10 years old. Right, parents are deemed a moocher because they lose their job. When the unemployment rate is 9.9%, then they're deemed a moocher, and then there's less food for their 10-year-old. That's the real effect of their bill. And then for Medicaid, the real effect is more than 10,000 people dead every single year who shouldn't have died, who wouldn't have died.
Right, and there is I want to say it again. There is no offsetting benefit to the economy that's going to let the folks who are in these groups get better jobs and be able to pay for it themselves. That's just not what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. That is absolutely right. And over the long run, everyone just ends up worse off because of this. And as you said, Edwin, you could ameliorate some of the deficit impact with tariffs, but then that also hampers the economy, and that also leaves people worse off.
Massively regressive.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Tell me at least that the provision banning the use of funds that might allow the judiciary to hold the executive branch in contempt is dead. That at least has already been nixed in a birdbath.
We expect we haven't gotten a ruling on that yet. So we just for the first, I think, 5 committees. Yep. Do we have her guidance yet? But I feel pretty darn certain about that we're going to win on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is fundamentally like the sort of thing that Robert Byrd would have been against having in reconciliation. It has nothing to do with the government spending more or less money.
Well, how long does this process take? When are we going to know what world we live in?
Fast. This is fast. So they're going at breakneck speed. They're having a bird bath right now, and they're having finances going tomorrow, and then they will be done with bird bathing, and then we will have the results in the next few days. And they are maybe moving to proceed early next week and being done in the Senate by the end of next week. Then the question is, what's going on with the House, right? So if folks want to be involved, now is the time to get involved. Now is the time to call your senator. Now is the time to attend a town hall, if they were ever doing any of those, and speak to your member and say, don't do this. Now is the time to call back your old House member who maybe voted yes and say, don't do it. Now it's real. You weren't playing with live ammo before. Now you are. If you vote yes now, it actually happens. And now is the time to call your Republican governor. And your Republican governor doesn't want all these costs kind of being imposed upon them. With the state share, it's less, but still there are new costs being imposed upon them. And they can talk to their members. So yeah, it could theoretically, we could be done with the Senate by the end of next week. And in the House could go just a day or two later. It all depends on the politics.
Wow, really terrifying. I mean, so everyone who's listening, you heard Bobby say that these legislators think they have an audience of one, and that one isn't you, but you have a voice, you have a vote. You can't let them think you don't. You can't let them think you didn't. Might as well live, in a country with a dictator, and that doesn't even pretend not to. If you're not willing to use your voice when it matters, this is when it matters. Call somebody. I love the idea of calling a governor, getting the governors involved. That's a great idea, Bobby.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say that this was the approach taken in 2017. We need to reach out to anyone who could matter, and it is an uphill battle, but we owe it. We owe it to people. Quite literally, people will be dying if this passes. Not dropping on the street left and right, but it will be in America that is more unfair, that leaves the poorest worse off while the richest can be better. That's the sort of thing that we need to use our voice on. And it is really tough, but it is worth it to try, because sometimes you win, and then it really, really, really mattered that you did it.
Yeah. All right. So if you don't want to be sicker, poorer, and less safe, now's the time to raise your hand. Bobby, thank you. And thank you for the unbelievable work that you do. I can't imagine what just the sheer amount of labor it takes to keep track of all of the committees that have a hand in this work, and all of the processes that they have to go through to get from an idea to an actual budget law.
I am very tired. And when this is all over, one way or the other, I will be taking vacation. Thank you so much for having me.
You'll have earned it. Thank you. Let's talk again after it passes, so you can let us know what the final thing looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. All right, everybody. That was Bobby Kogan, an unbelievable resource for everyone for the work he does at Center for American Progress on our budget. We're going to take a quick break, and your calls when we come back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I want to hear from you, and let's kick it off. Dave.
Hey, Edwin. I was thinking on this with these B-2 bombers and such, and why do they not just let the Israeli pilots fly them? Can't say because it's a U.S. plane, because we totally equipped the Israeli Air Force with our F-16s, and we pay for Iron Dome, and each year we pay in Israel like $800 billion, and in that bunker buster bomb, I've never heard, has it ever been tested out totally? And if it has, it's been only in desert sands and not the rock mountains. And I understand they go down about 200 feet only. So, and if they're correct with where this reactor down there is supposed to be around 300 or so. So they're going to have to maybe do about maybe 3, and if it's accurate, and if the Iranians didn't have also another tunnel to, like eastward or something, to have another reactor,
Look, we're not at war with Iran. I mean, nobody likes the Iranian regime, and they have been terrible actors on the world stage. But we're not at war with Iran. There are a lot of terrible countries that we're not at war with. The idea that we are that right now we are flying these incredibly complicated and expensive killing machines. I'm not for a lack. I believe that we should have a strong defense. But now we're flying them and positioning them. It's all nobody is doing the work that we need to do in this time of war to reduce the tensions and to bring about peace. And lots of people have been killed over there. Israel is in a much stronger position than it has been in decades because the bad actors that Iran has funded, they've taken out. But at an enormous human cost certainly in Gaza, but now expanding elsewhere. And wars are dangerous and they don't stay put. So instead of asking Dave, could we train the Israeli pilots to drop a bomb that might work using American technology? I have a different question. What are we doing to bring about peace? A just peace that makes, Israel secure and, for gosh sakes, lets its neighbors live their full lives. And there's still hostages that have to come home. All of this is complicated, but flying around B-2 bombers is really just to get our attention so they can pass that terrible law. We're going to talk about will Trump, won't Trump. But the real thing is, we have to stop Congress from passing this law because they're going to transform America in ways that are going to be just devastating for decades.
Believe me,
anyway,
I'm not a hawk for doing it, but we've been since '79, and I was living through that over there when we were on alert and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And in a sense, we're still smarting. We're still smarting from that overtake of the embassy.
I agree with you. Look, nobody is weeping tears for the Mullah regime in Iran. I mean, the Iranian people are amazing, but again, they are governed by a terrible dictatorship run by these ayatollahs.
But you know what? Because Mercurial loves Trump, because the scary thing is, what do we do on day 2, the day after?
We don't have a clue.
Mind, and all of a sudden you got atomic war going on.
Whatever it is, we don't have a plan. And how good was our plan in Iraq when we went in there? We were there for years, and a lot of good it did us. We were in Afghanistan for years. I believe today it's governed by the Taliban. Oh, and by the way, the Afghans who helped us, we are sending them back there right now.
Yep.
So, we are a fickle partner.
Yeah. Well, like with Iraq, that's when we got lied into that time. Remember with the yellow cake and stuff like that? Yeah. And we're kind of
nobody is saying
that one over again,
And Dave, they said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Here, they're not even saying that. Here, they're saying Iran may someday get one, and we can't let that happen. And I agree, Iran should never have a nuclear weapon. I agree.
I'm with you on
but
that,
there are other ways to solve that problem than creating an enormous war in a faraway place. I mean,
right? No, I'm with you on
no
that
tag
one.
this out.
Like you, I lived it in '79, and when I was in the green uniform at the time, and you didn't know if it was going to happen then. But but since Netanyahu been in, I mean, he's been always saying, that they're a week away or a couple days away. Like it's almost like he wants maybe somebody else's blood shed and not the Israeli blood.
Well, Israel's done in its own defense. It's very hard for me to talk about. October 7th was disgusting terror brought to Israel by Hamas, and horrible. Really horrible.
No argument here.
And Israel used that as to go to war against Hamas, but at the same time, it had an opportunity to weaken all of the proxies that Iran pays for that have threatened its security around it. They took out a chunk of Hezbollah, made it much weaker. It's still there, but it's much weaker. They're even, all the way in Yemen, taking on some of the Houthis. So Iran's proxy armies have been very badly damaged, all of which makes Israel safer. But the existential threat's a nuclear bomb from Iran. But I don't think that's really the threat right now. It's all been degraded. They just don't want a settlement with Iran that is, we're going to make peace and we're going to unfreeze your money, because they know that Iran is going to use that money once again to pay for terror activity around its borders. It's a really complicated problem. But instead of trying to solve it, we're flying, our most lethal weapons over there, and making it all much more dangerous.
You're right.
At some point, we have to be peacemakers.
No argument here. It's just that.
One more thing. One more thing on this topic. Donald Trump. Well, now we know what our foreign policy is about, because he got Pakistan to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Right? I wonder what he traded away of American, foreign policy in order to get him to do that. This is all
another one you got to worry about between them and India lobbying nuclear at each other.
I know.
Anyway, well, listen, let me clear out so others can talk.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for hearing me out, Edwin. Have a good week.
You bet.
And be well.
You too. Jim.
Hi, Edwin. Treason has been in the Republican Party since Nixon. You recall the conversation with Dirksen and Johnson. He said, this is treason. He said, I know it's treason. But Johnson couldn't say anything because he didn't want to. It was 3 days before the election. And then Reagan's up to his eyeballs in treason. But the Republican Party's figured out, how do we mitigate treason? We buy the Supreme Court. We get enough money to buy the Supreme Court, and then we commandeer the Internet. We take over these religious stations and fill the public with nonsense while we commit treason. It reminds me of the day that Washington, Lafayette, and Hamilton went to have lunch with Benedict Arnold, and he wasn't there. So Washington had tears in his eyes, and Lafayette was mollified. He was only about 22. And Hamilton was livid, but luckily they had an older French general there. He said, no time to sell it, more or less. No time to sell the farm now. We're up to our eyeballs.
Yeah.
Anyway, but treason is their game. I mean, let's face it. It didn't have to be this guy. It could have been John Q. Citizen. They would have denied the election in 2020. They would have had the same. He didn't just walk out on that stage with that thing come out of his mouth. It was well planned out. So the treason, they're up to their eyeballs in treason. And the other thing that kills me so much is this Netanyahu, to me, is one of the most bloodthirsty creatures I've ever seen. I listen to these doctors in Palestine, American doctors, that go to risk their lives to go there. Just last week, one from Oregon was there. He couldn't believe his eyes. He goes, I'm here. Before, when some of the other doctors he talked to, were treating, gunshot wounds of kids and innocent people. He said, now they're using tanks where they're distributing food. And for the life of me, I don't know why he thinks he can attack Iran and kill innocent citizens there. I don't know how that got into his mind either. I know he can't land in 7 different countries because he'd be arrested immediately. But we're in a very and the Republicans love him. I mean, they love Netanyahu for some reason. I don't know why. I have no idea why. But we're in this is a treasonous party. There's no doubt about it. And how do you fight treason? You can't take it to the courts because the courts have already been bought off. They're not going to listen to a January 20th insurrection. You think they'd hear an insurrection case in the United States of America with that court? They might have years ago, but they wouldn't do it now.
They did. They did hear a case. They absolutely did. Colorado ruled that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist. and not entitled to run because the 14th Amendment bans insurrectionists who've sworn an oath from running. And this Supreme Court said, yeah, no, we didn't, they didn't mean it.
Well, exhibit number one. Anyway, but, I know you're a Cubs fan, but the Ernie Banks' old team, what kills me, how can they play so good when Stump is circling the White House and when he's in the White House? There's something strange about that. Anyway, Edwin, you have a great weekend. Stay cool, buddy. This is like the Mojave Desert out here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hot out there today, for sure.
Yeah, take care of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Max, you're next.
Oh, hi. So, well, first I wanted to just say about, like, what you were talking about earlier about that, about the democracy. I've been noticing as I've been driving around, I was working down in Florida just right after the Memorial Day. And I noticed that I go through this little town, and there's a lot more flags of soldiers that have passed away just in this small county, and I'm just like amazed by how many people are dying, in wars for the U.S. And and I actually, when I go over there, a lot of the people I work for are veterans, and this lady, she served 20 years, and her son served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he couldn't handle it. When he came back, he was fine, stuff. He fought and done whatever they wanted him to do, and he couldn't handle what was going on back over there and losing his friends and stuff, and he actually committed suicide. This is like 15 years. And we go over there, me and a bunch of my friends, and we hang out, like with them and, stuff, and, just kick back and talk about, what's happening next and stuff like that. But, this is, I normally stay when I in a hotel, and I listen to C-SPAN all the time. And like as I was listening to it, I was like, okay, people, you're listening to people calling up and saying they're asking about who supports war in, I don't know if it was Ukraine, Iran, or whatever, it didn't matter, and you're listening to these people say, oh yeah, we got to kick their butt, and we got to do this, and we got to do that, and I'm like, wow, I go, and I remember reading, like maybe 20 years ago or so, that, only 4%, I know people, only 4% of the American people know somebody that was actually serving in those 2 wars. 4%, people. You got to listen to this. If you want to support a war, let's have a volunteer. This is what we've been talking to our representatives for. I'm 65 years old, okay, and I'm more than willing to arm up and go over and have any war with anyone if my representative gets a suit on too and he stands beside me, okay? And that's what I'm talking about. These people, they want to have war. They want to pick their fists up, but they do not have what it takes to put it on the uniform and get over there and fight with someone where they have another arm and they're going to shoot at them. And this is the problem that we have. That these people cannot be voting or letting this fool, any one of them, I'm talking about Biden too, any one of these fools say, let's go to war, let's kill these people, but they are not. They're 2 five-time draft dodgers, deferments, whatever you want to call it. You can read, what's her name, Sheila Baer's book, and she talks about how these rich people get off of serving in the military, okay? And that's Biden, that's Trump, and that's Bush, that's Cheney, and that's all these other warmongers that want to have war, that want to kill people and have your children die for it. And you know what? You think that's fine? Okay, from the beginning of the 9/11 to 2019, we have had 32 Americans that served in those two wars commit suicide. The number today is 17 a day. Do that from 2019 to 17, and see how many of our servicemen that do not get treatment commit suicide. Okay, and we have a lot of dead Americans, a lot of dead, and okay, a lot of them are there because they want to get an education, whatever else. But 14% of them, people that I know, are patriotic, and they're going to go and serve their country because they think that's what they need to do. Okay, but we got these fools, though, they're wanting to go to any war that we have, and then that way the Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and them can make money and have a nice home and whatever else, and whoever else, well, the hell with you. And that's what we have in our society today, and that has got to end. You know, if you want to support a war, put a uniform on. That's all I'm saying.
Yep, and you said it well. I appreciate it. It needed to be said. Thank you, Max. Thank you. Cynthia.
Hey, Edwin. I wanted to thank you for educating me today. Your show was very educational. And I also wanted to mention that for Juneteenth, there was a brief documentary on the original Statue of Liberty, and that they had to modify it to be more inclusive, but initially it started out being a representation of slaves being freed. And if people Google the Statue Liberty feet, they will see the chains on her leg that are broken. And I think that's very significant because a lot of times we hear history or we hear things, but rarely is there supporting proof. And I was just really overcome with that image because they did modify the Statue of Liberty to say, give us your poor, your... You know, I don't know what else it says, but initially
you're hungry, your huddled masses yearning to be free.
Yeah, so I would encourage people to just Google Statue Liberty feet, and I believe it's her right foot. You'll see the chains underneath her gown. Because they don't want history to be taught, you know. So we're supposed to be uneducated, no health care, no food, no housing, no safe streets, and then to do what?
Then to do what? Right? That's a good question. Then to do what? Well, this bill that Congress is looking at is really the most dangerous thing out there. And I urge you to reach out while you still have the chance. You're in Colorado?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes,
reach out to your government.
I communicate with Hickenlooper and Bennett all the time.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for calling, and thank you for being part of this, and thank you for the story about the Statue of Liberty.
Yes. Thank you for your education today.
I'm glad you're part of it. Thanks, Cynthia. Paul. Hey, Paul.
Yeah, Edwin, you know, I just was replying to Dave here about, we may still be smarting over the takeover of the embassy in 1979 in Tehran, but they are still smarting from our deposing their democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1952. Or was it 53, I guess?
54, I think. But,
54. Yeah. Okay, well, and then reinstalling the Pahlavi dynasty, the Shah, the Muhammad Pahlavi, which was a deposed dynasty in World War I. And that angered them. And the Shah was a brutal dictator. And when you interfere with somebody's country and their governance, you anger the people and you bring out the most extreme factions in that country, and that's what we did. That's what we did.
Well, who interfered with us, Paul, to bring out the most extreme faction in our country? Because the most extreme faction in our country is now writing laws that we can't see past. What did we do to deserve this here?
Well, I don't know. And that's another point I was going to make is I am so disillusioned, Edwin, at how the Constitution has fallen apart like a cheap suit. And I mean the kind of cheap suit that they put on people when they bury them. The kind you couldn't even wear out for an evening and fall off your back. They give them cardboard shoes, the kind of stuff they bury people in. You look at I can't believe that slight majorities, razor thin majorities in the Congress have brought us to this. They've abdicated their role, their powers. And the court, first of all, the idea that these panel of on the Ninth Circuit of 2 Trump appointees, it's a slam dunk that the military should not be in L.A. The governor doesn't want them there. That's the only test. There's no let's wait and see if. Come on, that's the. And the longer that goes on until eventually some court, I guess it's the Supreme Court is now, or if they can go to an en banc ruling, I can't believe that. I think there are 27 judges on the Ninth Circuit. The en banc ruling will say, no, get out of there. But if it goes to the Supreme Court, I don't know what they'll do. And,
yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Stay as long as you like. And what your guest was saying earlier when talking about the ruling in Tennessee is what the Roberts Court has been doing all along. And Stephen Breyer, I think, brought this up in his book that he wrote last year, was they keep changing they change the question to answer so that they can answer it the way they want to. And that's what they've been doing from Citizens United to, that's what they do is they just keep, they bring up questions that the plaintiff or whatever, the litigants aren't even addressing. They just say, oh, we'll bring up another question that is so that we can answer it the way we want to. It's just wrong jurisprudence. And I can't believe that this is happening the way it is. It's just, and we have a complete rogue. I thought that these intelligent people, and I don't think anybody in any of the courts are stupid, but Donald Trump is stupid, that they would defer to that guy? For what purpose? He's a madman. And he's going
but you know what purpose. The purpose has been the same for a long time. They've been hostile to democracy for a very long time. They're afraid that the public, if we ever had real power, would take their property. And that's why they think they exist. And it's really
and that's what,
frightening.
But every time I say what a crappy country, when you talk me down and say that, but it's the best we have. But wait a minute, all we ever do is fight about how the rich and the powerful shouldn't be taking away what they have clearly taken more and more away from us.
Yep, and we have a fight on our hands.
I tell people this, is that you ask a conservative, are there any really bad Supreme Court rulings? They'll inevitably say, Dred Scott, the worst one ever. And I used to think that. I used to say that all the time until I started becoming aware of this. And then I say to them, what was wrong with it? Well, they can't tell you. Because the problem in the Dred Scott ruling was not that Roger Taney was a racist, a slave owner, and he had 24 pages of abhorrent dicta. The ruling was consistent with the Constitution. The Constitution was the problem with the Dred Scott decision, and that's why we had 4 years of a bloody, bloody war. And then 3 amendments added to the Constitution. That helped. It helped, but they certainly were not the big fix, were they?
Well, we have our work cut out for us. And it's going to get, I'm an optimist, but I also know, as I've said, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And they are going to pass some version of this horrific budget that is going to make America poorer, sicker, and less safe, and far less equal. And that is going to make this fight harder. But you know what? It was hard before, and we fought it before. Anyway, Paul, thank you. I got time for one more, and I'm going to squeeze Al in. And I know, Roosevelt, you're on the line, but I'm not going to get to you today. I'm sorry. Al, you're next.
Hi, Edwin. I got 3 points, so out of many. But I was going to talk about how great last week's protest was on No Kings, and now Indivisible and other people have planned the next protest to be on July 17th. And it is July 17th because that is the 5th anniversary of John Lewis's death. And that protest is going to be more about voters' rights and the re-messaging, and I could find more things on it. They have some good messaging on it, and I've listened to some of what Ezra and Leah have said about that. And the whole thing is that
you got 30 more seconds.
It's on a weekday, and wouldn't it be great if a lot of companies also gave time off and so on, because we got to get to that 3.5%, which we can talk all about. Okay.
Thank you. Hey, listen, everybody, thank you all for today. I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, keep the faith, keep the fight. For God's sakes, call your congressman, your senator, your governor, and say to them they cannot pass this bill. Take care.